What if the deepest grief you ever experience is not for someone who walked away, but for a version of yourself that no longer exists? Have you ever looked in the mirror after a massive shift in your life, a heartbreak, a failure, a loss, a profound change in your circumstances, and felt like you were staring at a stranger? You know the eyes, you recognize the face, but the spirit behind them feels entirely different. You feel displaced, empty, exhausted. Most people do not realize that when a chapter of life suddenly closes, we do not just mourn the loss of the relationship, the job, or the familiar routine. We mourn the person we were when we had those things. The you who laughed in that house, the you who felt secure in that career, the you who believed in a certain future. That version of you is gone. And losing yourself is a very quiet, very lonely kind of heartbreak. You might find yourself constantly looking backward, trying to resurrect that old self, trying to force yourself to feel the way you used to feel, to care about the things you used to care about, to fit back into a shape you have clearly outgrown. But here is the truth. The harder you try to drag your past self into your present reality, the more you suffer. Buddhist wisdom teaches a beautiful and difficult concept: impermanence. We are often quick to accept that seasons change, that day turns to night, that flowers bloom and fade. Yet we rigidly refuse to accept that we, too, are bound by the exact same law of nature. We treat our identity as if it were carved into solid stone, meant to last forever. But in Buddhist thought, the self is not a monument. It is a river. Imagine a river flowing steadily down a mountain. It begins as melting ice, becomes a rushing stream, slows down into a wide, quiet body of water, and eventually dissolves into the vast ocean. At no point is the water the exact same as it was a mile back. If the river tried to cling to the mountain, it would never reach the sea. It must constantly leave its former state behind to move forward. Think about your own life. You have just been through a storm. The waters have shifted. The landscape has changed. Yet, you are exhausting your spirit trying to swim backward against the current, desperately reaching for a shore that has already washed away. Ask yourself right now, are you suffering because you do not know who you are anymore? Or are you suffering because you are demanding to be someone you can no longer be? There is no shame in feeling lost. Losing a version of yourself hurts, but trying to wear a skin you have already shed will only suffocate the person you are meant to become. Pause. Breathe. Observe the heavy feeling of loss in your chest without letting it define your future. You do not have to fix it today. You just have to stop fighting the reality of the change. Let the grief rise. Acknowledge that the old you did their job. They carried you as far as they could, but they cannot walk with you into this new chapter. Letting go of who you were is the only way to make space for who you are becoming. It requires a tremendous amount of courage to stand empty-handed in the unknown. But understanding that you are changing is only the beginning, because beneath the fear of losing yourself is a deeper misunderstanding of what the self actually is. And this is where the next truth begins. What if the person you are so desperately trying to find again was never a permanent fixture to begin with? Here is a truth that goes against almost everything modern society teaches us about identity. We are told to find ourselves, to build a solid sense of self, to figure out exactly who we are and stay fiercely loyal to that image. But this demand for a permanent identity is the exact root of your current suffering. Think about the labels you have carried throughout your life. Perhaps you were always the strong one in your family. Perhaps your identity was completely tied to being someone's partner, or holding a specific job title, or being the person who always had their life perfectly organized. When a major life shift suddenly strips those labels away, the devastation is overwhelming. You feel completely unanchored, You look around the empty space and panic. If you are no longer that person, then who are you? In Buddhist philosophy, there is a profound teaching that speaks directly to this exact pain. It is the understanding that there is no fixed, unchanging core self. You are not a static object. You are a continuously unfolding process. To believe that your identity must remain exactly the same year after year is an illusion. The suffering you feel right now is not because you are fundamentally broken. It is because you are clinging to an illusion of permanence in a reality that is beautifully and sometimes painfully fluid. Imagine a towering ancient tree standing in the middle of a silent forest. In the spring, it is completely covered in bright green leaves. In the autumn, its colors shift to fire, eventually dropping its foliage to the earth. In the dead of winter, it stands entirely bare, its branches exposed to the biting wind. If the tree believed its true and only identity was the green leaves of spring, it would spend the entire winter in deep misery, feeling empty and incomplete. It would feel like it had lost its true self. But the tree is not just the leaves. The tree is the roots, the deep wood, the quiet resting, and the hidden growth. The bare branches of winter are just as much the tree as the vibrant blossoms of spring. You are currently walking through your winter. A major change has stripped away your familiar leaves, the routine you loved, the relationship that defined your days, the certainty of your future. They have fallen to the ground. And because you are looking at your bare branches, you are convinced you have lost yourself. You feel naked. You feel unrecognizable. Ask yourself honestly, are you judging your current worth by the standards of a season that has already passed? What old label are you gripping so tightly that it is actually keeping you trapped in pain? Pause, breathe. Allow yourself to just be here, without a defining label. You do not need to figure out exactly who you are today. You do not need to quickly replace the lost pieces just to feel whole again. You do not have to announce a new identity to the world. Just exist in the quiet space of this transition. The essence of who you are has not been destroyed. It is simply resting and reshaping itself beneath the surface. You are not a failure for feeling unrecognizable to yourself. You are simply evolving. But if this evolution is perfectly natural, why does it hurt so much? Why do our minds constantly drag us backward, begging for the comfort of the way things used to be? Because letting go of the past means walking through a very specific, deeply human fear. What if the past you are crying over is not actually what you miss? What if what you truly miss is simply the feeling of knowing what happens next? Here is a truth that is hard to hear. We do not just cling to the past because we loved it. We cling to it because it is familiar. When your life is turned upside down by a major change, a sudden ending, a shifting relationship, a profound loss, your mind panics. It looks at the vast, unwritten future and sees only danger. So, it runs backward. It makes you replay old conversations in your head late at night. It makes you scroll through old memories, obsessing over a time when you felt secure. It makes you reach out to situations that have already ended. It tricks you into believing that if you can just hold on to the memory tightly enough, you will not lose that old version of yourself. But one of the deepest lessons of Buddhism is that attachment causes suffering. Our greatest pain does not come from the fact that things change and end. Our pain comes from our rigid refusal to let them end. We suffer because we demand that the temporary become permanent. The mind builds a ghost out of the past and then tries to live inside a haunted house rather than walking out the front door into the sunlight. Imagine a small boat tied to a wooden dock. The dock represents your past, the old version of you, the life you used to know, the plans you used to have. Now, a massive storm has rolled in. The tide is rapidly rising. The water is surging and the landscape is shifting. If the boat remains tightly tied to the dock as the water rises, the tension on the rope will become unbearable. Eventually, the very rope meant to keep the boat safe will drag it underwater. The only way for the boat to survive the rising tide is to untie the knot. It must let go of the dock and ride the rough water. You are that boat. Your life has changed. The water has risen, but you are still gripping the rope, refusing to untie yourself from a dock that is already completely submerged. You are trying to live in a reality that no longer exists, comparing every new moment to a past that has already washed away. Think about that. How much of your current emotional exhaustion is simply the tension of holding onto that rope? Ask yourself right now, what are you still holding onto? What are you secretly afraid will happen if you finally let go of the person you used to be? Is your grip on the past bringing you peace, or is it feeding your fear? Stop trying to pull the dock back above the water. Pause, breathe. Observe the thought of the past without following it into the darkness. Let the memory arise, but do not drop your anchor there. You do not have to forcefully erase your history or pretend it did not matter. You simply have to stop letting it drown your present. You can gently loosen your grip. You can untie the rope. Because peace is not something you chase backward. It is something you make space for in the current moment. But releasing the rope means you must drift into the open water. It means sitting in the uncomfortable emptiness of the unknown. And this is exactly where the next truth begins. What if the emptiness you feel right now is not a sign that your life is falling apart, but a sign that it is finally clearing out? Here is the truth few people want to face about profound change. We celebrate the beginning. We romanticize the ending. But we are absolutely terrified of the middle. When you have finally loosened your grip on the past, but the future has not yet arrived, you enter a quiet, uncomfortable void. You are standing in the hallway, having closed the door behind you, but the next door has not yet opened. In modern life, this in-between space feels like a failure. You look at your peers on social media, in your workplace, in your family, and they all seem to have a defined destination. They have clear titles, stable relationships, and predictable paths. When you look at your own life and see only a blank page, the fear of falling behind becomes paralyzing. You want to rush the process. You want to instantly create a new identity just to stop feeling so invisible. You want to force a quick answer so you do not have to sit with the painful uncertainty. But Buddhism reminds us that this empty space is not a punishment, it is a sacred necessity. In Buddhist thought, emptiness is not a dark, terrifying void, it is pure potential. It is the blank canvas before the first stroke of paint. It is the quiet pause at the end of an exhale, right before the next breath begins. Without that pause, there is no rhythm. Without that emptiness, there is no room for anything new to grow. Imagine a tiny seed planted deep in the cold, dark earth. If the seed had human emotions, it might panic. It is surrounded by heavy soil. It cannot see the sun. It has lost its smooth, familiar outer shell, and it has not yet broken through the surface to become a flower. To the seed, this darkness feels like an absolute ending. It feels like being buried alive, but in reality, this silent, uncomfortable destruction is the exact environment required for transformation. The seed is doing the most important work of its life entirely in the dark. You are in the dark earth. You have shed your old shell, but you have not yet seen the light of the new season, and that is exactly where you are supposed to be. Think about your own life right now. You are exhausted from trying to force your own blooming. You are desperately trying to drag yourself out of the soil before your roots are even ready. Ask yourself, are you trying to rush this transition simply because you are afraid of the silence? Are you trying to force the next door open just so you do not have to stand in the hallway alone? Stop trying to force the door open. Pause. Breathe. Let the feeling of uncertainty rise without making it your identity. You do not need to have the answer today. You do not need to announce your new self to the world. Let the dark earth hold you. Allow yourself to just be a work in progress. Do your part, then release the outcome. Because you cannot build a peaceful future if you are frantically running through the present. Peace is not found by sprinting to the finish line. It is found by deeply trusting the weight. But trusting the weight means you must finally look at the heavy bags you carried with you into this quiet space. And this is where the next truth begins. What if the weight pulling you under is not the uncertainty of tomorrow, but the heavy stories of yesterday that you simply refuse to put down? Here is the truth few people want to face. We are fiercely addicted to our own suffering. When a major life change strips away the version of ourselves we used to know, we do not just mourn the loss. We build a monument to it. We replay the final conversations in our heads late at night. We obsess over the what-ifs. We torture ourselves with visions of how our lives should have looked by now, comparing our current reality to a dream that no longer exists. You carry the old promises. You carry the expectations of the person you used to be. You carry the heavy resentment of how unfairly things changed. Buddhism teaches a profound lesson about the nature of this specific pain. It is the teaching of the two arrows. When an unexpected change or loss strikes your life, that is the first arrow. It brings unavoidable pain, but the second arrow is the one we shoot into ourselves. The second arrow is our resistance to reality. It is the story we tell ourselves about how this should not have happened, how we must have failed, or how we need to fix the past. The first arrow is the unavoidable pain of life. The second arrow is the heavy baggage of what was, and it is this second arrow that creates your ongoing suffering. Imagine a traveler hiking up a steep, difficult mountain. The path is already rough, the air is thin, and the climb requires all of their strength. But instead of traveling light, this hiker carries a massive, heavy backpack filled with rocks. Every time they remember a beautiful view they used to love, they pick up a rock. Every time they dwell on a mistake they made at the bottom of the mountain, they add another rock to the bag. Eventually, the traveler collapses on the trail. They blame the mountain. They believe the path is simply too hard to climb, but the mountain is not defeating them. They are being crushed by the weight of their own bag. Think about your own life. You are navigating a steep and difficult transition. You are climbing a new mountain, but you are trying to do it while carrying the entire weight of your previous life on your back. You are dragging the ghost of your old relationship, your old career, or your old identity into every new room you enter. Ask yourself right now, what heavy story are you still carrying? Are you holding on to an old pain simply because it is the only piece of your past you have left? Is this memory bringing you peace, or is it just another rock in your bag? Stop, breathe. You do not have to carry it all. You can put the bag down. Acknowledge that the rocks belong to the mountain you have already climbed. They do not belong on this new path. Let the feeling of loss rise without making it your identity. You do not have to forget the past, but you must stop allowing it to crush your present, because peace is not the absence of the past. It is the quiet refusal to carry its weight. But dropping the heavy baggage of what was requires something much harder than simply letting go. It requires you to look at the person who packed those bags in the first place, and this is where the next truth begins. What if the person you are judging the most harshly is simply the version of you who was trying their hardest to survive? Here is a truth we rarely admit when our lives fall apart. When a major chapter ends and we are forced to change, we often look back with deep resentment. We are not just angry at the world, we are fiercely angry at our past selves. You look at the choices you made, the clear warnings you ignored, the time you poured into a path that ultimately failed, the people you trusted who eventually walked away. Sitting in the aftermath of a massive life shift, It is so easy to whisper, "I should have known better." We begin to treat our former self as if they were a careless enemy who purposely led us into a storm. But Buddhist wisdom teaches a profound lesson about compassion. We are quick to offer forgiveness to a friend who makes a mistake, yet we deny that exact same grace to our own history. In Buddhist thought, much of our suffering comes from a lack of clear seeing. The version of you from 5 years ago, or even 5 months ago, was acting out of the exact awareness, the exact fears, and the exact emotional tools they had at that moment. To angrily judge your past self using the wisdom you only gained because of their mistakes is a heavy, unnecessary cruelty. Imagine a traveler lost in a pitch-black cave, armed with nothing but a tiny, flickering candle. In the dim, shaky light, they stumble. They scrape their hands against sharp walls. They take a wrong turn and hit a painful dead end. Eventually, after hours of struggling, they find their way out into the brilliant, warm sunlight. But instead of resting in the light, the traveler furiously screams at the person they were in the cave. They scream, "Why couldn't you see the path clearly? Why did you trip?" But the person in the cave only had a candle. They were doing the very best they could in the dark. Think about your own life. You are punishing the you who stayed too long in a painful situation. You are blaming the you who tried so desperately to please others just to feel safe. You are angry at the you who gripped a failing reality because they were terrified of the unknown. But that version of you was in the dark. They were trying to keep you safe. They were holding a tiny candle, doing exactly what they thought was right to protect your heart. Ask yourself right now, are you holding a heavy grudge against a version of yourself that no longer exists? Is this self-blame bringing you clarity, or is it just another way to reject the present moment? Stop fighting your own history. Pause, breathe, send a quiet wave of forgiveness to that past version of you. Observe the regret without letting it consume your worth. Acknowledge that they did their heavy lifting. They survived the dark cave. They got you to the sunlight. Now it is time to let them rest. Because true peace is not found by erasing your past mistakes. It is found by gently forgiving the person who made them. But once you forgive that old version of yourself, a beautiful question remains. What do you do with the joy, the passion, and the love that old self used to hold? And this is where the next truth begins. What if the beautiful things you thought you lost were never actually tied to the people, places, or times you left behind? Here is the truth about losing a version of yourself. When a profound chapter of our lives comes to an unexpected end, we make a devastating mistake. We believe that the joy, the passion, and the deep capacity to love belonged exclusively to the circumstances that just vanished. You believe that your spark was permanently tied to that specific relationship. You believe your purpose was locked inside that lost career. You believe your sense of peace only existed in that old routine. So, you grip the memory. You try to drag the past into the present because you are terrified that if you let go of the situation, you will lose the love it held forever. But Buddhism reminds us of a vital distinction between the container and what it holds. Our suffering comes from our deep attachment to form the specific shape our life took. We cling to the structure. Yet, the essence of who you are, the pure energy of your love and joy, is formless. When a chapter closes, the form breaks. But the essence does not vanish. It is simply waiting to take a new shape. Imagine a beautiful clay jar filled with cool, clear water. For years, you relied on this jar. It was familiar. It sat securely on your table, and you believed it was the only source of your comfort. One day, the jar falls to the floor and shatters into pieces. If you believe the water and the clay jar are the exact same thing, you will sit on the floor crying over the broken clay, absolutely convinced that you will be thirsty for the rest of your life. But the jar was never the source. It was only holding the water for a short time. The essence, the water itself, can be carried forward and poured into a brand new vessel. Think about your own life right now. You are sitting on the floor, weeping over the shattered clay of your old reality. You are trying to glue the broken pieces of a former relationship, an old identity, or a closed chapter back together, cutting your own hands in the process. You are doing this because you think the love spilled out and disappeared when the change happened, but the love was always yours. The passion was generated by your own heart. The deep connection you felt was your own beautiful energy, simply reflecting off a temporary surface. Ask yourself, are you actually mourning the loss of love, or are you just gripping the specific shape it used to take? What if the joy you experienced in your past was never left behind in the ruins, but is resting inside you right now, waiting for a new place to flow? Stop trying to rebuild a broken jar. Pause, breathe, observe the love you still hold, without trying to force it back into an old mold. Let the heavy sadness of the broken form pass. You do not have to leave your love in the past. You can reclaim your fire, gather the lessons, the softness, and the deep capacity for joy, and carry them forward into the unknown. Because the beauty of your past was never the circumstances. The beauty was always you. But bringing that beautiful truth into the present moment requires one final, courageous act of acceptance. And this is where the final truth begins. What if the stranger you see in the mirror is not a reflection of who you have lost, but a beautiful introduction to who you have yet to become? We began this journey by looking at the deep, quiet grief of outgrowing a version of yourself, the profound exhaustion of trying to force a closed door back open, the terror of the empty space between who you were and who you are becoming. For so long, you have believed that losing your old identity meant losing your worth. But as we have explored, the river must flow to reach the ocean. The tree must shed its leaves to survive the winter. The boat must finally let go of the submerged dock. Buddhism teaches us that true peace is not found by aggressively building a permanent identity and defending it at all costs. It is not found by clinging tightly to the ghost of a past that has already moved on. Peace is found in the gentle surrender to your own evolution. It is found when you finally stop fighting the reality of the present moment. You have been through a profound storm. The water has risen, and the familiar landscape has completely changed. But you are still here. Think about that. Let that sink in. After everything that has fallen away, after the old forms have broken and the seasons have violently turned, the essence of who you are remains. The capacity to love deeply, to care, and to rebuild is still fully intact. It was never left behind in the ruins of your old life. It is resting quietly within you, waiting for you to gently acknowledge it. You do not need to resurrect the person you used to be. You do not need to frantically search for the old you to feel whole again. They did their job. They carried you bravely through the dark cave, and they brought you to the sunlight. Now, it is time to let them rest. It is time to release them with deep gratitude and profound self-respect. And it is time to meet yourself exactly where you are today. You are allowed to stand in the quiet, blank space of this new chapter without immediately rushing to fill it. You are allowed to be completely unknown to yourself for a little while. You are allowed to let the dark soil hold you until you are ready to bloom again. Pause, breathe. Look at your life not as a tragedy of what was lost, but as a vast, beautiful space cleared for what is to come. Let go of the heavy bags. Forgive the mistakes of the past. Stop trying to carry the old shape of your life back into the present. Instead, gather all the love, the resilience, and the quiet wisdom you have earned. Carry that love forward into the unwritten future. You are not powerless. You are simply starting a new chapter, and you can begin it with empty hands and an open heart. If these lessons touched your heart, share this video with someone who may need a little more peace today. You can let go now,